Thank you. Thanks to everybody. It's great to be here. Always, I always think that when you get people together, good things happen. So I think there's going to be a lot of good things happening at the conference over the next couple of days. This is actually the 10th annual Ripple Interfaith Conference. And it's a decade of a lot of great engagement around interfaith. Every year I learn something when I come to this conference, and so I'm so grateful that for those guests that are joining us from other institutions and for the Elon community that's joined us, that you're here, because I can testify that the team has put together a remarkable program and really a program to prosper the thinking about interfaith from a different perspective. And this year's theme, The Art of Interfaith, brings together faith and so many creative traditions. And so there'll be music and poetry, dance and film. There'll be lots of storytelling, and tomorrow I think there's like karaoke opportunity as well, open mic performance. So if you have any hidden talents, there'll be an opportunity to share them. One of the things with the conference is that our keynote always opens it up by sharing a unique perspective around interfaith. And the keynote ends up setting the tone of the conference. No pressure. But then the rest of the 2 days, people are talking about the lecture, the remarks, and how they connect to what they're learning in the different panels and sessions. So it really is an opportunity to come together. And just personally, I'll say that this work in interfaith is more important than ever before. People may think, oh, that's... When they mentioned I was at the Citadel, which is it is a military college, and but most people that graduate from there don't go on to the military. But I can remember having a conversation with the faculty about why world religions, they didn't have that class, and how important it would be at a military college to have it. Well, it's really important, not just at a in any environment of higher learning, to think through religion and faith and purpose and spiritual traditions as they intersect with the way we dream about the future and the way we're imagining a global world will work, and to be at the, how that sense of purpose and light and spirituality can be a centerpiece in our lives. So we're actually going to hear a global story, I think, tonight about interfaith. So tonight we welcome our keynote, Dr. Rodger Kamenetz. He said it sounded like cabinet, so I'm going to try to do it. Rodger Kamenetz, a scholar whose work has shaped conversations about spirituality and dialogue. His book, The Jew and the Lotus, chronicles a historic meeting between Jewish leaders and the Dalai Lama, offering insights into the intersections of faith and identity. And I believe that was a historic meeting, that something like that had never happened, and that what occurred did influence what happened after that meeting. So his writing challenges us to think in new ways about connection, meaning, and the role of dreams in spiritual life. So please join me in welcoming Rodger to the podium.
All right, going to set the tone, huh? Let's do that. All right, Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, Salam Alaikum, Shanti, Tashedela, and good evening. So happy to see you all. Okay, so the title of this talk, what was the title? I think it's called Imagination and the Sacred Encounter, is that right? And primary imagination. Okay, that's it. Thank you. And you can all hear me beautifully, I think. Let me know if it's too loud. So, Dr. Cook mentioned some of my interests with, obviously, Jewish-Buddhist dialogue and Jew and the Lotus. I really am a poet originally and still am, and I do something called natural dream work, which I've been doing since 2003, where I've spent a lot of time inside people's dreams, and some of that's rubbed off on me as well. I wrote a book called The History of Last Night's Dream, and that got me into that. So I wanted to give you a little précis of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about rhymes. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to talk about rhymes, but at a whole lot of levels. So I'd like to start by reading a poem, and I'm going to ask you to do something a little strange, maybe, but I'd like you to, I'm going to read it slow, and I'd like you, if you like, to close your eyes or just kind of, look inward. And what I want you to listen for, first of all, is when you hear an image. There's a lot of words in this little thing, and some of them make images and some don't. And I'd like to see if you can find an image. And then if you do find an image, you should take a moment to feel into it for yourself. Okay, so this poem is called Practice Heaven, which I think is appropriate for this. Okay. Practice heaven. This means practice the feelings you would have in heaven. Practice them now while you are still alive. Practice living in harmony and grace. Drink the milk of paradise and eat the honeydew. Be kind. Look into the depths of things. Respect the world inside each person. Respect the angelic in the person. Listen for the angelic and amplify it. Return indifference with curiosity. Be gentle in word and gesture, gentle in speech, gentle hands and gentle tongue. Live each moment. Live the past as the shadow behind you, but walk in the sun. Walk to the light. Love the light in each one. Love the one in each one. See unity and simplicity. See the curve of the eyebrow in the rainbow. Hear the human voice in the sparrow. Feel the sparrow bones in the child's hand. Be gentle with the imagination of children. Love as the child loves. Cry as the child cries. Follow your way. Consult the sensations in your body. Practice heaven. Wake from your dreams into dream. Know you have choice. See compulsion for what it is, cruelty and violence. Never say what you always say, but only what the moment requires. Breathe the air as the air of heaven and be grateful. Let thank you be your prayer and speak to God through persons. Okay, so if you found an image, just an image that came through to you, see if you can visualize it to some extent. See if you can see it and feel into it. Tell me what you feel with the image. It's not a test. Okay. Does anybody want to share? Who? You're pointing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, you.
So there was a line about the sparrow's bones in the child's hand. I really felt like feeling the hand, and then you're walking alongside this child, so then you're like holding hands with them.
Wow.
And then when I was just sitting with that image, I looked down and it was like me when I was 3 years old or something like that. So I feel like that imagery of holding a child's hand is really powerful.
And then you became the child. Like first you were holding the child's hand, and then it sounds like you became the child.
Laughing how the child laughs and cries.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Someone else? There was someone. Yes?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if there was a specific visual, but the feeling, you were asking about the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling was peaceful
Peaceful. Mm-hmm.
and just being in a beautiful place, and you said practice heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that means treating everybody as
Beautiful. I think you did get an overall feeling. That's wonderful. So when we think of the image of the sparrow, I should have memorized it. Feel the sparrow bones in the child's hand. That's an image because you can see it. And then once you see it, you can also feel it. There's also a sense of touch in there, isn't there? It's like more than one sense. We say image, and people think of images as, you know, only visual, but an image can include any of the senses. So I think when you can focus in on an image, you can find a feeling in the image. And that's what I mean by feeling into. So there were some rhymes. Anybody notice any rhymes? I know it's hard. I didn't want to put it up here. I wanted you to listen. It's okay. So we heard eyebrow, rainbow, and sparrow. And if you took advanced English, you know that rainbow and sparrow are pretty near rhymes. And eyebrow would be called a sight rhyme, so it's also a rhyme. It has the O-W, even though you can't pronounce it. That's fancy. But there's a different kind of rhyming, which is not just the sounds that rhyme, but in this case, the likeness between an eyebrow and a rainbow, right? So that's a different level of rhyming. We could call that rhyming. And a poet I knew, Robert Duncan, once said that there's a structure of rhyme that goes all the way from words rhyming to realms of being. In other words, it goes from the smallest detail all the way up to the largest conception. So in that sense, you know, sadness rhymes with happiness. He says it's on a scale of resemblance and disresemblance. So a rhyme can also be two things that are opposites. Heaven rhymes with hell. Hatred rhymes with love. So we see that there's structures of rhyme, and this is a theme that we're going to move on. The universe is a giant interactive poem. It rhymes at all levels. And we can see rhymes at all scales. So I'm going to share a little dream. I dreamed of a boy. He didn't speak, but he was sort of glowing with light. And I came a little closer, and he bowed his head down. He didn't say anything. He just bowed his head down. And instead of hair, he had sunflower seeds whirling around like you see in a sunflower. That was a holy moment. It was outside anything I'd ever imagined. That quality in a dream of things you see that you couldn't possibly, you think, I couldn't have made that up. I mean, I never could have. I never could have thought of that. And that encounter with him felt supernatural. We met in a dream, but the feeling was real. When I thought about the image, I realized, of course, that the whirl that we see in a scalp, when we look at a child's top of a child's head, and the whirl in a sunflower, it's the same. It's the same spiral. So that's a structure of rhyme. There's a rhyme between the sunflower and the scalp, which the dream put in my face. And then if you think on it and feel into it, there's another rhyme at a different scale between the scalp, the sunflower, and the Milky Way. Because the Milky Way is a spiral galaxy, and all the stuff, like right now, we are part of that. We're kind of at an exurb of it. We're kind of not in the middle, maybe just as well. But we're whirling around as we sit here around this center, just like the whirl of your scalp and the whirl of the sunflower. So there are rhymes between things and things in the universe that begin to suggest something that maybe we're not as chaotic and disorganized a universe as we sometimes think. I think the search for rhymes and affinities gives us a sense of the whole. Aristotle said, poetry unifies, history aggregates, it clumps. History is one damn thing after another. But poetry, or the attempt of imagination, what imagination wants to do is unify and bring diverse elements into a whole. So there's a poet, William Wordsworth. He was a British Romantic poet. I never cared for him very much. I thought he was a little too English and very stuffy. How many people have actually read any William Wordsworth? Wow, he's still going strong. Okay, that's great. I was more of a William Blake person. But he was a teacher. I'm not just viewing him as a poet, but he was really a spiritual teacher, because he was, even though he was writing, he lived through the French Revolution when he was a young man, and he came back to England, and he lived in the countryside in the Lake District, but he was introspective. He was looking inward to figure out, how did my mind grow? It sounds self-centered. Some people said it was, but that's really part of his interest. How do we grow an imaginative mind? How did he grow his imaginative mind? So when he was a boy, when he was about 7, his mother died. And he speculates that when he was a baby, of course he didn't remember, that his first act of imagination when he was suckling with his mother was to imagine that she was a whole person, that she wasn't just a hand or a face or a breast, that she was a whole person. That's the first act of imagination, that moment when you realize there's a whole person here. He speculated, maybe Winnicott agrees with him, that that's the first act of infant imagination. So she died when he was 7, and his father sent him to a boarding school, and he said that the props, meaning his mother, he sort of had the props of the building disappeared, but the building stood. He found this same sense of wholeness in nature, and he noticed these affinities between things and things. He also noticed something that most people, well, maybe you do, I'm feeling gloomy, there's clouds over my head. We notice affinities between our inner feelings and the outer world. He distinguished his feelings by looking at things in the world, in nature. So when he looked at a lake, the calm and dead still water lay upon my mind, even with a weight of pleasure. And the sky, never before so beautiful, sank down into my heart. So the world itself became a way of understanding his feelings. And this was his search for affinities. I think great artists seek these rhymes. Leonardo da Vinci learned to draw hair by studying flowing water. And he learned how to draw water by studying hair. When he was a 4-year-old prodigy, the cellist Yo-Yo Ma used to play a very difficult piece by Bach. When he got older and got more mental, more analytical, he lost that ease. But he discovered a remedy by contemplating an image. He said, if I thought of an image of water or a brook or a river, and if I thought that the piece started before I began, I just joined the water, and then he could play. So you see how he was using an image to move himself into a piece of music. So by the time he was 17, his habit of looking for affinities was rooted so deeply in his mind that he says, I conversed with things that really are and saw blessings spread around me like a sea. So what we're really talking about here is what is our access to certain kinds of experience on which all religions are actually based? What is our own access? We say all these things, these words, and we pray them and we study them, but what is your personal access in your life to the feeling of connection to the whole? How do you get to that? How do you develop that? And it turns out that the answer is poetry, of course, poetic imagination. I remember an affinity I stumbled on when my daughter Anya was about 4, and she asked me what clouds were. So I took her in the bathroom, and I turned on the hot on the shower until the room filled up with steam, and I said, that's clouds. And she never forgot that. So recently, she writes a Substack called The Golden Hour about climate change, and she told me this story. Her daughter, my granddaughter, Elvie, who was 7 at the time, said, Mom, what do you see? Like, when you look at things, do you see the same thing that I see? Great question, isn't it? 7 years old, okay. So she came to stand in front of me, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and we looked out the window, I guess, to see. I tried to describe the sunlight playing over the oak leaves as the branches tossed gently in the morning breeze with a flat city sky peeking out behind them, as if I'd never seen it before and didn't know the words. The leaves look like they're talking, I said. Now they look like they're arguing, she said, as they gesticulated a little faster. We spied a new strawberry peeking out from our patch on the desk. She pointed out how the flashing sun seemed to fatten the telephone wire. Oh, she's going to be a poet. Oh, that's it, right? Fatten the telephone wire. Come on, that's amazing. So I think this illustrates also Wordsworth's concept that maybe this search for affinity and connection between feelings and things stems from the initial scene between the mother and the child. After all, we speak of Mother Nature, right? We speak of Mother Earth, and for good reason. So this practice of Wordsworth, of seeking affinities between things and things, noticing them, and between feelings and things, brought him to a place that was quite extraordinary. And I want to talk about that. It's what's called the cosmic religious feeling or the cosmic religious experience, or getting high, like feeling this connection to everything, that all is one, right? And he said that he went through this sense that being spread over all that moves, all that is lost beyond the reach of thought and human knowledge to the human eye, invisible, yet lives in the heart and in all that leaps and runs, and shouts and sings and flies and glides beneath the waves and in the wave itself and the mighty depths of waters. In all things I saw one life and felt that it was joy. Wow, okay, so that's a place. Have any of you been there? I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. I think if you search through your memory, you have had this feeling. You get the sense of what I'm getting at? You have felt this. Heads are nodding or falling asleep. But you've felt this, right? So this, do we treasure it? Do we cherish it? Do we go back and contemplate it? Do we nourish ourselves with the memory of these extraordinary moments? I'd like to recommend we do. So, Wordsworth describes how he reached this place through a process of letting go of his ego and becoming a living soul. So there's a change in him that allowed him to receive this vision. A lot of other people have been there. Emerson wrote that standing on the bare ground, my head bathed in the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. So let's do that. Let's become transparent eyeballs. Keats spoke more about the quality that keeps us from doing that when he spoke of negative capability as a freedom from all irritable reaching after fact or reasons, and an openness to identifying with everything he saw. I'd like to call it the great opening, for want of a better name. This great opening and expansiveness of consciousness where the ego is no longer at the wheel or in the driver's seat. Delmore Schwartz said, the ego is always at the wheel. By the way, when you look at people's driving dreams, you see that immediately, right? Like if the dreams are all, I'm driving, you find out after a while the car doesn't like that. It starts rolling backwards. The brakes don't work. You had those, that dream? So, or suddenly you can't see. It's like saying, well, you really don't need to be in the driver's seat in life. You don't need to be in charge of everything. So, the Sufis have a saying, die before you die. Christians speak of dying to self. The Hasidim, the pious Jews of 19th century Europe and today, speak of Bitul HaYesh, which is the nothingness of the somethingness. Right? You think you're something? No, you're not. You're nothing. Right? Dalai Lama, who's a non-theist, you might as well put him in here, right? He teaches that there are two main factors for purifying afflictive states of mind. Afflictive states of mind like anxiety. None of you have ever experienced these, but anxiety, reactive anger, like when you're on Facebook, or you guys don't do Facebook anymore, right? What do you all do? Instagram, social media, which is designed to cause reactivity, right? So the Dalai Lama felt, that the whole problem, like when we came to Dharamsala in 1990, he had one question for the Jews: how do you survive in exile? Okay, that's a good question. I wrote a book about that. You can read it. But he also had a second question, which is really very challenging to all of us here, which is, we have our practices that help us to purify afflictive states of mind. What are your practices to purify afflictive states of mind? Now, you think about our religious practices, we pray, we sing, we stand, we if you're Jewish, you build sukkahs, you eat matzah, you do all kinds of stuff. But if the question is, how does that purify afflictive states of mind, where you live in reactivity, anxiety, rage, shame, guilt, right? These are all afflictive states of mind. And when you do that, you can't get access to this feeling that Albert Einstein called the cosmic religious feeling or the cosmic religious experience. Wordsworth said the first effect of the great opening was a change in himself, so that with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. what is seeing into as compared to seeing? What is feeling? We did a little exercise of feeling into. What is feeling into as opposed to just feeling? What does it mean to see into the life of things? It's such a simple phrase, but it's quite interesting. So he says it, William Blake speaks of it this way, that we have double vision. We can see with the eye, with the physical eye, that's seeing, or we can see through the eye, right? Then we're seeing into. We see through the eye with the imagination. We see with the eye, oh, there's this, there's that. So what, when I didn't get your name, the child, yep. What's your name? Savannah. Wonderful. So when Savannah was feeling into the image, it began to move, it began to change. She was putting herself into it. She literally put herself into it. So this is a mysterious thing we can do where we can feel into something. So, around, towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, these German psychologists were investigating feeling into. And they were investigating feeling into in relationship to poetry, music, dance, and everything else. So how do you feel into something? And they realized that, for instance, let's say you're watching a dance. People are dancing, and you're in your seat, right? But your nerves are dancing. We actually have these things called mirror neurons that imitate in our bodies what we see. So when we feel into something, we appreciate it. I mean, originally the term in German was Einfühlung, which means in feeling, in my bad German. I probably didn't pronounce it right. Einfühlung. We have any German speakers here? Okay. Okay, is that right? Einfühlung? So Einfühlung, feeling into, if we're discussing it in terms of paintings and statues and music and dance, the way in which we can get enraptured and feel into it and feel a part of it. And then they had this insight that you could also have Einfühlung, feeling into, with people. We can feel into people. We can imagine their situation. We can feel as they feel. And it seems very convincing. It doesn't seem like we're adding something. It seems more like we're receiving something. Do you know what I mean? When you meet someone and you just feel like, I get this person, and it doesn't feel like I'm projecting myself into them. It feels like they're sending and I'm receiving, which is very mysterious. So I think it was around 1906, an American psychologist translated this thesis into English, and he wanted to translate Einfühlung, so he had to invent a new word. So he took the ein and turned it into M, and the Fühlung into pathos from Greek, and invented the word empathy. So empathy was originally looking for what's beautiful in the world, in nature, and it turned into looking for what's beautiful in every person. That would be a radical empathy. And I think that's important to understand, that if we approach other people looking for what's good in them and focusing exclusively on that and not judging them, not seeing them with the body's eye and saying, oh, I don't like the shoes, or, that person isn't like me, or, oh, I don't like those kind of people, or whatever reactivity you have, if instead you can look at people and feel into them and feel somewhere in there, even if your first impression isn't good, there's some really good point in there, and you can sort of lift them up based on those good points and move them from the scale of judgment into the scale of goodness. So that's a practice I call blessing people. And I think it's really a good practice. to practice when you encounter people and notice something and say, oh, I want to say, the way you just said that was really amazing. Or, thank you so much for a glass of water. Or whatever it is. But to amplify and elevate the good points instead of being in reactivity and constantly diminishing the world by judging people. Now, this business of seeing into, I can look into my friend's eyes and see life in them, but is that just my imagination? Am I just fantasizing? It feels like I'm knowing it. Basic empathy. I feel life and love with most animals I encounter, most immediately with my dog, Kenny G. It's a Havanese. I don't believe people who say dogs don't have feelings. I can see into the life of Kenny, even though I know I don't know much of that, or how much is real and how much is anthropomorphizing. In moments of feeling, I cross the verge and the imagination feels real. I'm not afraid of spiders or wasps. I feel very comfortable photographing wasps close up, like paper wasps. If they stung me, it would hurt really badly. I love to observe different kinds of wasps in their colors and forms. The potter wasps, who build nests out of clay, and the blue ensign wasp with sky blue eyes. I admire the organ pipe nests of the mud dauber. I like all the insect artists and architects. I admire the strange bricolage of twigs of a bagworm moth hanging on a lintel, not to mention the enormous strong webs of the banana spider stretching from tree to tree. So when I listen to the wren or cardinal, I feel into the life they lead, though I don't know much about it. I feel community when one calls to another. When I hear a lonely male bird calling for a mate. I once heard the mournful cry of a young male alligator in Lake Vernon. I was just a foot away in a boat. He rose straight up out of the water, and he called with such a deep, pained roar across the miles, hoping for a mate. I could feel him, brother. I felt you, brother. I know what was going on in you, right? So this is kind of seeing into the life of things, feeling into the life of things, and when you do that, you're enlarging yourself, because then your whole world is no longer a bunch of indifferent birds and animals and dogs and people and things, but they become alive for you. And I think that's a blessing path. Although I do have some trouble seeing into the life of plants. Except I felt my own dance in the storm when the bamboo in our backyard was swaying. And I remembered that Basho, the great Japanese haiku poet, said, if you want to write about the bamboo, you must become the bamboo. Right. I'd like to become the bamboo. Okay. I'm trying to skip ahead a little bit. So, Wordsworth had an experience which he describes in a poem called Tintern Abbey. It goes like this. And it's similar to In All Things I Saw One Life, but felt that it was joy, but it's more in motion. He says, I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. So he describes a religious experience while not using any religious language. He uses the language of natural things. The closest he gets to naming is that it's a something and a presence. He really avoids naming what this is or giving it a name. So this is part of this experience thing, that if you come in with all the names And we know all the names, depending on your faith, your practice. We have different names, right, that we use. And sometimes the name gets in the way of the experience. So I'm kind of flipping it and saying, well, let's talk about the moment before the name. Let's talk about what it's like to not have a name, but to have the feeling and the experience. So Albert Einstein talked about that. He talked about a cosmic religious consciousness. Of course he did. He was a cosmologist. I mean, makes sense, right? Right? And he said, it's an interesting thing. When you think about Wordsworth's idea of the one life, Einstein said, a human being is a part of the whole called by us universe. Does anyone know what universe actually means? Use it all the time. Well, verse, of course, means turning, right? Like reverse. And uni means what? One. Turning into one. So the sense of oneness is primary. So Einstein said that we are a part of a whole called the universe, a part limited in time and space. The human being experiences himself or herself, thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest. Each of us is sitting here in this universe thinking, I am me and my thoughts are my thoughts and your thoughts are your thoughts and you wear green shirts and I wear blue shirts and we're really different. We're separate, right? He says this sense of separateness from the whole universe, not just from other people, but from the whole universe, from the birds and the trees and the spiders and the rocks, right, is a prison. It's a prison that restricts us to our personal desires and for affection for just a few people who are close to us, family members, maybe a few neighbors. After that, it drops away. You see what he's talking about, right? So you know what he calls it? I love this. He calls it an optical delusion of consciousness. In other words, this sense of an I creates an optical delusion that there's me and then there's everything else. How could that be? It's a universe. How could I be separate from the universe? We're all part of it. And I think when you feel that, when that ego drops away and you feel that you're part of the universe, you have this cosmic religious feeling. Einstein remembered a time when he was about 4 or 5, he was sick in bed, and his father brought him a magnetic compass to amuse him. And he noticed the needle moving towards north as he turned it around. And nothing was making it move. Some force was moving it that was very far away. It made a deep and lasting impression, he said. Something deeply hidden had to be behind things. Right. So Einstein felt that both artists, poets, writers, and scientists shared this sense of something behind things. And that both scientists in doing their work and artists doing their work could help each other to support the importance of this cosmic religious feeling. I think he was skeptical that religion would continue to be able to do that. And he thought it might be the job of scientists and artists to maintain open the possibility that we could have these feelings for ourselves, right? Without, you can get it, you can have religious feelings, obviously, in religious settings, of course. But he's suggesting, and I think Wordsworth is suggesting, you can also have it in nature, and you can have it through relationships with other people, through feeling into other people, which is kind of a radical empathy. Right. All right. So all of this sense of a cosmic religious experience is built up through noticing particular moments of affinity between your feelings and things or your feelings and people. And I wanted to read a poem. I'm reading poems because Morgan asked me to. It's all her fault. But you can blame her afterwards. But I'll read slow, but I think in this poem there are a lot of verbal images. You know, as a Jew, I'm often told, well, your religion is aniconic. Do you know that? You know that means we don't have icons. We're right. So if you go into a synagogue, and also if you go into a mosque, you'll see that there are not artistic representations or sculptures of people or forms like that. It's something Judaism and Islam have in common. I think everyone has read the 10 Commandments or the 10 Utterances. I think if you think about a list of 10 most important things, one of them is don't make a graven image. I wouldn't have come to mind, like as one of the top 10, and yet there it is. It's quite extraordinary. But while it's forbidden to make graven images, if you read the Bible, the Torah, it's full of images. If you read the Psalms, you think of justice will flow like the mighty waters, right? Martin Luther King's speech, from Amos. I mean, the prophets are full of images, but they're verbal images. Now, here's the thing about verbal images that relates to what Wordsworth was doing. When you look at a painting, the image is out there. When you look at a sculpture, the image is out there. But when you read an image in a poem, which is why you can't speed read poetry, you have to do something inside of you that Savannah did earlier on. You have to see I think a number of you did, but you have to see and feel into the image in order to create it. And what's weird is everybody's reading the same words, but we sort of suspect that nobody, sort of what my granddaughter was saying, maybe nobody is actually seeing the same image, right? Even if I say apple, some of you might see a red one or a green one, a little one, a big one, a rotten apple, a broken apple, applesauce, right? So you're going to see different things with each word. So let's try that out. Again, in other words, instead of just feeling into people or feeling into things or feeling into whatever, what is it like to feel into words? Because words create images, and those images carry feelings that connect us. So I wrote a poem, I guess I wrote this, or it was written through me. It's called The Illustrated Book of God. Okay. I opened the illustrated book of God. It was written all of gold letters. There was a fire on page 1. The flames licked the page. I stopped reading with my eyes and read with my tongue. I tasted vermilion. I put my ear to the page and heard the lion's roar. I heard the clouds. I touched the bleak thorns of the acacia. I marched on oceans. My feet grew weary. I sank into the delicious black mud with bare feet and bare bottom. I opened the door to the stranger who lit candles in the sun. I walked on the moon. I knew strange love of every kind. Nothing was forbidden. I knew what other men thought they knew. The Father came to me and blessed my broken mind. He comforted the mother who had lost her child. He sang of the shepherd and the shape. My body disappeared and I walked into pages. The gold letters left imprint on my subtle body. I knew and knew the end and the beginning. I tasted the water of loving kindness and drank a fill. The peacocks led me to the horizon. The elephants recited their Bible. The lions returned and ate my heart. I died in the dark of my last page. The book went on, still unopened, still unknown, its hand beyond knowing. So I wanted to end, I may have gone over my time, I don't know, but I wanted to end with a little talk about interfaith dialogue. And we talked already about empathy, and it's quite obvious that empathy is the basis for being able to do dialogue with respect and with love, right? We have to feel into the life of the other person. I'll tell you a little story that I witnessed a dialogue between my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, and the Dalai Lama. And, we were all like, oh my God, the Dalai Lama, he walks in the room and it's like, oh, and he's glowing. And it's true. I mean, there's a big debate before they met with him. Can we call him Your Holiness? The Jews were kind of like, well, I don't want to call anybody, one human being holy. That's a little, goyisha. I mean, we don't really want to do that. So, but as soon as he walked in, it was like, Your Holiness, it was like, the guy's holy. It's like, all those little concerns were like irrelevant. Who cares? Forget the nomenclature. The dude's holy. But how do you talk to this unicorn of spirituality? How do you even begin to have a conversation? So Reb Zalman began when he sat with him, and he was feeling into the other person or intuiting the other person. And he said, Your Holiness, the background was Reb Zalman, when he was 17, he was in Vienna, and the Nazis came in and took over. It's called the Anschluss. They took over Austria. Oh gosh, I hope we're not seeing times like that now. And his family fled, and he went to Antwerp, and then Antwerp was bombed, and he went to an internment camp in southern France, and then eventually got to West Indies, and then finally New York. So he did all that while still a teenager. The Dalai Lama was a teenager when he was 15, and the Chinese, the Red Chinese Army, the Red Army came in 1949, 1950. He sat across the table from Mao Zedong, 15-year-old. Mao Zedong said, religion is poison. Okay. And there was kind of a failed revolt, and then the Dalai Lama's life was in danger, so he got on a yak, literally, and went over the Himalayas when he was 24, and has been in exile ever since. He's going to be 90, I think, next year. So how do you talk to him? Well, Zalman talked to him as a fellow survivor. But not only as a survivor, but as someone who carried the burden of the whole tradition that was disappearing behind him. We don't. In the case of the Shoah, the Holocaust, we think about, of course, the deaths of all the people, but also all of the best institutions for Jewish learning were all destroyed. It's sort of like the Harvard and Yale of yeshivas was destroyed. And a lot of the holier, wiser people had a lot of faith, and they stayed. Of course, they died. Billy Wilder said once very cynically, because he had escaped, he said the pessimist went to Hollywood and the optimist went to Auschwitz. Right? So some of the best people are the ones who become the victims. So speaking from that place to him, he said, when I think about the burdens you share and the decisions you have to make about what you're going to keep for the Tibetan people and what you need to change because you're living in new conditions, right? Which is the same problem I think all religions face, right? He says, I feel with you from heart to heart. And the Dalai Lama kind of grasped his hand and leaned forward and just said very quietly, "Thank you." But it was such a powerful moment of empathy, and it really impressed me. When I came back, this was 1990, I happened to turn on the TV. There used to be this guy back in the ancient days but he's a familiar type. He was sort of a right-wing commentator, loud person. For some reason, bad karma, the Dalai Lama was his guest on an interview. And this man, his name was John McLaughlin, turned to him. I want you to imagine a guy with kind of, when he gets mad, his face turns all red. the dude. He says, this is opening words to like this unique master of Buddhist wisdom. He says, "You don't believe in God, do you?" It's a great way to start dialogue, John. So but I think that's something for us to think about here. If we want to do serious dialogue, it's better not to start with the difference. It's really better to start with what we have in common. And this is why I'm suggesting this idea of seeking affinities, both as a way of tuning in to your connection to the universe and kind of correcting that optical delusion, right? Learning how to correct it moment by moment. And I think that's also something we all have in common. I mean, every religion knows about this and teaches it in different ways. But it's something we can also share and access regardless of your religious language. To think about those moments when you have felt that connectivity apart from a religious structure, but from a personal connection. Because I think if we bring that into it, I think that's a way of having a conversation that might go a little bit deeper. So I said I was going to talk about rhymes. I did. But by rhymes, obviously, I mean this sense of connection between ourselves and everything there is. Okay, thank you.